Harriet Tubman, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Frederick Douglass. These freedom fighters all spoke at or passed through this church here in Ithaca 2 centuries ago. The St. James A.M.E. Zion Church, located near the South Side Community Center, is the oldest active church in its denomination in the world, and it served as a crucial stop along the Underground Railroad, safeguarding enslaved freedom seekers in the 19th century.
People would go up this way. Ithaca, of course, going north here. Very important too is just along the canal. Mm-hmm. You know, that whole area up there. There were houses, these houses, some of them, but this is not all of them, right? And the idea would be to get to just north of Niagara.
That's Gerard Atching, director of the Underground Railroad Project and professor at Cornell University, explaining the path freedom seekers would take to reach Canada, where they would be safe. There were houses along the way, including here at St. James, where they could seek shelter. Every Saturday from September 18th to November 13th, archaeologists from Cornell and local community members came together to participate in excavations at the church in hopes of uncovering artifacts from the time period of the Underground Railroad.
One of the things that we want to find as evidence of daily life in and around the church, to give us a better sense of what that was like. I think the elements that are found are going to give us indications of a community's resilience, of a community's hopefulness. It's going to be telling us about the importance of a community as it creates a place of worship and also a place of assisting not only their congregation but people coming through on the Underground Railroad.
Atching says much of the history of the Underground Railroad has been written from the perspective of the people who assisted, such as members of the Quaker denomination and abolitionists. He hopes this project will change that.
What we have little of is the histories of African Americans who either belong to the congregation or the neighborhoods having to write that history. Assisting anyone on the Underground Railroad was a civil disobedience. You could be thrown into jail for 6 months or fined. You would be very careful about letting people know who knows what activities you're doing. So we don't have much documentation. But I think what's powerful about this particular project is that it brings different sets of expertise to the table in order to speculate about what it would have been like for people going through the Underground Railroad and for people assisting on the Underground Railroad.
Lori Cachadorian is one of the directors of the excavation and an associate professor of archaeology at Cornell. She says the location of the trenches where they're searching for artifacts was strategically mapped out.
Historic maps of Ithaca show that there was a structure on that side of the church that was the parsonage, that was the pastor's house. And that building was constructed probably sometime between the very late 1890s and 1901, 1902. And so we're partially hoping to investigate that building and uncover some of its foundations and artifacts associated with that earlier parsonage.
Cornell sophomore and archaeology major Madeline Wenger took part in the project during the last 3 weeks, searching for artifacts in the 5th trench at St. James. The trench was close to reaching a bedrock depth of about 51 centimeters, where material culture from the 19th century would be present.
What we do is we excavate the soil, and then depending on if it's really sticky or if it's dry, we'll try to sift it, or we'll have to manually sift it, and then we'll separate anything that we think is of interest into a bag, and then that'll be cleaned and processed and labeled later. I take this scoop once I have lifted a bunch of soil, I put that into the bucket. The bucket is what we use to house any of the soil before it goes into the sifting mechanism, and then the sifting, anything that we pull out of the sifter will go into the plastic bag.
In this bag, Wenger's collected lots of glass, charcoal, red pottery, and brick.
We're finding the kinds of artifacts that you would expect for a site in New York in this time period. And I think, including everyday objects, everyday artifacts that speak to the daily practices and daily activities of the community associated with the church and with the parsonage.
Atching says the artifacts will be taken to the archaeology lab at Cornell and will likely be studied in the spring semester next year. They'll be cleaned, processed, and recorded in a database so the researchers can publish their findings before being returned to St. James, where he hopes an exhibit can be set up to display the artifacts to the public. For ICTV Reports, I'm Emily Hung.